Max suddenly stopped in the middle of the street, his body tense, eyes wide, his flicking toward every car that sped by. For a moment, it seemed like he was frozen, but then, with a loud bark, he ran straight into the path of oncoming cars, forcing them to screech to a halt. People honked, shouting angrily at him, but Max wasn't listening. His focus was on something else, something no one else could sense. Sarah, his owner, stood frozen, her heart racing. She tugged at his leash, but Max refused to move. This wasn't like him. Something wasn't right. She had never seen him act like this before. He was always calm, always by her side, his loyal companion. But today, it was different. He was agitated, almost frantic. As the cars around them slammed their brakes, Sarah felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Max's behavior was becoming more intense. She couldn't understand why, but she had learned to trust him. He had always been more than just a pet, he was her protector. But today, it felt like something was pushing him to do more than just protect her. It was as if he was warning her. Max barked again, louder this time, and then, as though driven by some hidden instinct, he sprinted across the street, directly into the path of an approaching vehicle. Sarah screamed his name, her voice filled with panic. She didn't know what was happening, but she felt a deep sense of dread. The car was speeding toward them, and there was no time to react. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. The driver of the car slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. Max was already in the way, positioning himself between the car and the oncoming pedestrians. With a sickening thud, the car collided with Max, sending him flying through the air. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Max, her loyal companion, had thrown himself into harm's way to protect the people around them. The car came to a halt, the driver stepping out in shock. Sarah rushed to Max's side, tears streaming down her face. "Max, no, please, wake up," she cried, her voice trembling. But Max was still breathing. His body was battered, but he was alive. She knew he was hurt, but she didn't care. He had saved lives. He had put himself in harm's way for others. And now, she had to save him. As the paramedics arrived, Sarah kept her hand on Max's head, trying to reassure him. She didn't know how she would make it through this, but she couldn't let him go. He had given everything to protect the people around them, and now it was her turn to protect him. In the back of the ambulance, as Max was stabilized, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace. She couldn't explain it, but there was something about this moment that felt different. Max had done something more than just stop a car. He had stopped something far bigger than just that. It was as if he knew something that nobody else could have known. As the ambulance raced to the animal hospital, Sarah sat in silence, holding Max's head in her lap. She had never felt this connected to him before. It wasn't just love, it was something deeper. Something unspoken. And she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a mystery that would change their lives forever. As the ambulance sped down the street, Sarah kept her eyes fixed on Max, who was still unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. She gently stroked his fur, hoping he would wake up. She whispered his name, but Max remained still. The pain in her chest was unbearable. She kept asking herself why he had done it. Why had he thrown himself into harm's way to save others? She couldn't understand it, but deep down, she knew Max wasn't just a regular dog. He had always been special, and today, he had proven it. He had given everything for people he didn't even know. When the ambulance arrived at the hospital, the team of vets rushed out to meet them. They immediately took Max inside, leaving Sarah standing in the cold night air. Her legs felt weak, her body trembling from the shock of what had just happened. The reality of it all was still sinking in. Max had risked his life. No, he had sacrificed himself. And she couldn't help but wonder, was this the first time he had done something like this? Or had he always been this brave, this willing to give it all for others? Sarah didn't have answers. All she knew was that Max was more than a pet. He was something else, something extraordinary. As she sat in the waiting room, her mind raced with questions. Could this have been a coincidence? Was Max just acting on instinct, or was there something he knew that nobody else could understand? Hours passed, and Sarah's thoughts drifted back to their daily walks. Max had always been protective, but she never realized just how deep his instincts ran. He had always been there for her, through the lonely days and the tough nights. But today, he had stepped up in a way she could never have imagined. He had acted without hesitation, without fear. And he had saved lives. Finally, a vet came out to speak with Sarah. His expression was serious but hopeful. "He's stable for now," the vet said. "Max is a strong dog. He's been through a lot, but he's a fighter." Relief washed over Sarah, but she still couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Max wasn't just fighting for his life. There was something more at play here. The vet continued, "There's something strange though, Sarah. When we examined him, we found something unusual, an old tag, attached to his collar. It doesn't look like anything we've seen before. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. A tag? She hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. The tag she had always seen on Max's collar had been a simple identification tag with his name and her phone number. But this one, something about it felt different. "Can I see it?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. The vet nodded and handed her the small, worn-out tag. It was round, with an unfamiliar symbol engraved on it. Sarah stared at it, confused. It looked like a logo, but it wasn't anything she recognized. The edges were chipped, as if it had been through a lot. It had clearly been there for a long time, but Sarah had never noticed it before. This isn't mine," Sarah murmured. "I've never seen it before." The vet raised an eyebrow. "It could be part of some old training program, but we'll need to run more tests to find out. It's strange, though. A dog like Max, with this kind of background. It's not something you see every day." Sarah's mind raced as she held the tag in her hands. Max had always been a mystery, but now it felt like the pieces were starting to fall into place. What kind of dog was he? Where had he come from? And why had he acted the way he did today? As the hours went by, Sarah sat by Max's side in the recovery room. The dog she loved, the dog she had always seen as a loyal companion, was now a hero in her eyes. But there was more to him than she had ever realized. And the more she thought about it, the more she felt like there was something hidden in his past, something he had never told her. Max was no ordinary dog. And Sarah knew she needed to find out what had happened to him before she could truly understand the full extent of his sacrifice. The next morning, Sarah returned to the hospital to check on Maximum. Her heart felt heavy, and there was a nervous tightness in her chest. She couldn't stop thinking about the tag. She had to know what it meant. Who had put it there? And why hadn't she noticed it all these years? Max had always been with her, since he was just a pup, and yet this tag had somehow slipped under her radar. When she entered the recovery room, she was relieved to see Max awake, his brown eyes staring at her with a familiar warmth. He was still lying on the bed, his body bandaged up from the impact. He looked up at her, his tail giving a small, weak wag. She smiled and gently stroked his head. "Hey, buddy. You're gonna be okay," she whispered, trying to reassure him. Max's body language seemed different, though. He wasn't his usual playful self. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes, as if he knew something was wrong but wasn't ready to talk about it. Sarah's fingers brushed over the collar again, where the mysterious tag still hung. As she stared at it, the questions piled up. The vet had promised to run more tests, but Sarah couldn't wait. She had to know everything. She couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was something deeply significant about what had happened. "Max," she said softly, kneeling beside him, "where did that tag come from?" The words slipped out before she could stop them, as if she expected an answer. Of course, Max couldn't respond, but his eyes seemed to study her intently, as if he understood the weight of the question. The hours dragged on, but Sarah couldn't shake the sense that there was a link between the strange tag, Max's behavior, and the events of the previous day. She wanted to believe that Max's heroic actions were just a product of his protective nature, but something in her gut told her it was more than that. Max had done something bigger than simply save a few strangers. He had known something was about to happen. Later that afternoon, Sarah left the hospital with Max, determined to learn more. She went straight to the vet's office to ask about the tests they were running, but she was also planning something else. She had a feeling she needed to go back to where it all started, the place where she first found Max. Years ago, she had adopted him from a shelter, but she never really knew anything about his past. She had always assumed he was just another stray looking for a home. But after yesterday, everything felt different. There was more to him than met the eye. At the shelter, Sarah met with the manager, who recognized her immediately. "How's Max doing?" the manager asked, noticing the worried look on Sarah's face. "He's recovering," Sarah said, her voice tight. "But I need to ask you something. When I adopted him, you didn't tell me much about his past. Do you know anything about where he came from, or if there was anything special about him?" The manager's expression changed immediately, his face going pale. "What are you asking, exactly?" he said, his voice lower now. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "I'm asking if Max was part of some program, or if there was anything unusual about him before he came to me." The manager hesitated, his eyes flickering away. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. There was definitely something he wasn't saying. I can't really say much," he said finally, his voice strained. "There were some things we weren't told. But if you really want to know, you might want to talk to the shelter director. He was the one who had most of the information about where Max came from." Sarah was confused but determined. "Where can I find him?" The manager gave her an address, though his eyes seemed to avoid hers. As she left the shelter, she felt the weight of the mystery growing heavier. The more she tried to uncover the truth, the more she realized that Max was far from an ordinary dog. Something about him was connected to a much bigger story, one that Sarah had never been told. When she arrived at the shelter director's office, she was met by a man with an air of secrecy. He was older than the manager, with a stern face and a cautious demeanor. "I understand you have questions about Max," he said as he gestured for her to sit down. "I need to know everything," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Why did Max act the way he did yesterday? What was that tag on his collar? And why didn't anyone tell me about his past?" The director sighed and leaned back in his chair, looking almost reluctant to speak. Max, he wasn't just a regular dog. He was part of a program, one that no longer exists. We were instructed to keep it quiet. He had training, special training. It was all classified, and no one was supposed to know. But I think it's time you knew the truth. Sarah's pulse quickened. The more he spoke, the more her mind raced. What had Max been a part of? What kind of life had he lived before she adopted him? The director paused, as if choosing his words carefully. Max was part of a special unit, trained for rescue missions, to respond to danger and disasters. He was trained to save lives, but not just in ordinary situations. The thing is, he was supposed to be part of a team, but for some reason, he ended up here, with you. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. A special unit? He was part of something like that? The director nodded. Yes. But that was years ago, and we lost track of the program. Max was one of the last dogs they sent out into the field before everything went dark. Sarah sat back in her chair, stunned by what she had just heard. There was so much she didn't know about Max's past, and so much more she needed to understand. The director's words lingered in Sarah's mind as she processed everything he had just revealed. Max had been part of something far greater than she could have imagined, a special unit trained for rescue missions, trained to save lives, to be the hero in dangerous situations. But why had he been placed in a shelter? Why had she never been told about his past? As she sat in the director's office, she could feel a cold shiver running down her spine. She had always known Max was special, but she never could have guessed the depth of his training. He had always been so instinctual, so driven to protect, but now, it made sense. His sudden bravery in the street, his willingness to throw himself in harm's way to save others, wasn't just instinct. It was part of him, part of what he had been trained to do. "I need to know more," Sarah said, her voice urgent. "What happened to the program? Why was Max put in a shelter?" The director sighed again, his face showing signs of regret. "The program was shut down a few years ago. They deemed it too dangerous, too unpredictable. They stopped the operations, and most of the dogs were either retired or reassigned. But some of them, like Max, they disappeared. We were never told why. We were just told to find homes for them. We had no idea what kind of impact they'd have on the people who adopted them." The silence in the room hung heavy as Sarah tried to absorb everything she was hearing. Max wasn't just a dog who had been lost and found. He had been part of something important, something that could change everything. The way he had protected people, how he had known when danger was near, wasn't just luck. It was his training. And it had saved lives. But Max, he's different, Sarah whispered to herself, more to reassure herself than to say anything out loud. She felt her chest tighten again. Max had never been a regular dog. She had always known that, but now the realization was hitting her hard. He wasn't just her loyal companion. He was trained for something bigger. "I understand you're overwhelmed," the director said, his voice softening. "But Max was part of something that was meant to do good. He's one of the best, one of the last of his kind. And he did what he was trained to do. He saved lives yesterday. He acted on instinct, and it's something he's always known how to do." "I need to find out more," Sarah said, determination filling her voice. "I need to know everything about the program. About what Max really went through. And if there's more to this than just him stopping a car." The director looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I think you know there's more, don't you? You can feel it, can't you? Max was never just a dog. And his actions yesterday were no accident. Something is coming, something bigger, and I think Max knows what it is." Sarah stood up, the weight of the director's words settling over her like a heavy cloud. What had he meant by something bigger? Was Max acting on more than just instinct? Was there a reason he had stepped into traffic that day? Was it possible that Max knew something about the future, something she couldn't see? Before Sarah could speak again, the director handed her a file. "This is all I can give you," he said quietly. "It's the last bit of information we have about the program and Max's involvement. But I warn you, it won't be easy to uncover everything. There are people who would rather forget what happened with those dogs." Sarah took the file, her mind racing with questions. What had Max really been a part of? What dangers had he been trained to face? And why had he risked his life to save those people? She left the director's office feeling more determined than ever. Max was more than just her dog. He was the key to uncovering something much bigger, something she wasn't prepared for. And as much as she had always wanted a simple life with him, she realized that life would never be the same again. As she walked back to the hospital, her heart was pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. The truth was out there, and she was going to find it. Whatever Max had been through, whatever he had been trained to do, she would stand by him. She had to. He had given everything for her and for others, and now it was time for her to return the favor. When she reached the hospital, Max was awake again, his eyes following her every move. He looked tired, but there was something in his gaze, something that said he understood everything that had happened. He knew there was more to their story than they both could have imagined. Sarah sat beside him, holding his paw gently. "We're going to figure this out, Maximum. I promise. I'll help you just like you helped me." Max let out a soft whine, his head resting on her lap. She could feel the bond between them growing even stronger. There was a mystery to unravel, but she knew that with Max by her side, they could face anything. And whatever dangers lay ahead, they would face them together. As the days passed, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Max was more than just a dog, he was part of a puzzle that she needed to solve. The mysterious tag, his heroic actions on the street, and now the information she had gotten from the shelter director were all linked together. Something larger was unfolding, and she couldn't help but feel that Max was the key to understanding it all. Sarah spent hours researching everything she could about the special unit Max had been a part of. She scoured old news articles, government reports, and online forums, trying to piece together the story. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized how secretive the program had been. Most of the information was redacted or buried deep in untraceable files. It was as if someone didn't want the world to know what had really happened. One evening, as Sarah was scrolling through yet another report, Max suddenly started acting restless. He was pacing around the room, his ears perked up, and his eyes darting toward the door. Sarah paused, her fingers still on the keyboard. It was like he was sensing something, but what? Max whined softly and walked over to the door, sitting down and looking at Sarah with an intensity she couldn't ignore. He was acting like he had done before, right before the accident. As if something was coming. "Max?" she asked, her voice tentative. "What is it, boy?" He didn't answer, of course, but his behavior spoke volumes. Sarah stood up, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck rise. There was a strange energy in the air, a sense of urgency that she couldn't place. Max stood up, walked over to the window, and began barking, loud, desperate barks that shook her out of her thoughts. She hurried over to the window and peered outside. The street was quiet, nothing unusual. But Max was insistent, his eyes wide with fear, as if he saw something she couldn't. He barked again, more urgently this time. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed Max's leash and hurried outside. Max pulled at the leash, leading her down the street at a rapid pace. She had no idea what was happening, but something told her that Max knew. He had always known. They walked for what felt like hours, Max pulling her through the familiar streets, past stores, and down alleyways. Sarah tried to keep up, but Max was relentless, as though he had a mission to complete. She was beginning to feel that familiar unease in her stomach, the feeling that she was following him toward something important and dangerous. Finally, they reached an abandoned warehouse at the edge of town. It was an eerie sight, dark and crumbling, with broken windows and rusted metal. Max stopped at the entrance, standing still and alert, staring into the shadows of the building. He had led her here for a reason. "Max," Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. "What's going on? What is it?" Max didn't respond. Instead, he took a step forward, his body tense and poised for action. Sarah hesitated, but she trusted him. He had saved lives before, and somehow, she knew he was leading her to something. Maybe even something that would reveal the answers she had been searching for. With a deep breath, Sarah followed Max into the warehouse. The air was thick with dust, and the only sound was the echo of their footsteps. The place felt abandoned, forgotten, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The darkness in the building was almost suffocating, and Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. What was Max sensing? What was hidden in this place? Max moved silently, his ears perked and his eyes scanning every corner of the room. He wasn't just walking, he was on alert. She could feel his anxiety, but there was also determination. He was leading her somewhere. Then, just as they reached the center of the warehouse, Max stopped. He stood frozen, staring at something in the corner of the room. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she turned her head, following Max's gaze. Her heart skipped a beat. In the corner of the room, hidden in the shadows, was a large, metal crate. The faint sound of breathing came from inside. It was faint, but unmistakable. Someone, or something, was trapped inside. Max's low growl cut through the silence, his body tense with anticipation. He knew there was something important inside that crate. Sarah's mind raced. Could it be related to the program Max had been a part of? Was this what he had been trained to find? She slowly approached the crate, her hands shaking as she reached for the latch. The breath inside the crate seemed to quicken as she touched it. Whatever was inside was alive. With a loud creak, the latch released, and the door of the crate swung open. What Sarah saw next made her gasp. Inside was a dog, a large, strong-looking German Shepherd, similar to Maximum. But this one was different. It was malnourished, its fur matted and dirty, its eyes wide with fear. The dog's gaze locked onto Max's, and for a brief moment, there was recognition. It was like they knew each other. Like they were part of the same story. Max stepped forward, lowering his head and whining softly. The other dog took a hesitant step forward, still wary but clearly responding to Max's presence. It was like they shared an unspoken connection. Sarah knelt down beside the crate, her heart breaking at the sight of the other dog. "What happened to you?" she whispered. Max looked at her, then back at the other dog. Sarah knew in that moment that this wasn't just another stray. This was someone, or something, connected to Max's past. The connection was undeniable. Max had brought her here for a reason, and the answers she had been searching for were closer than ever. The air in the warehouse felt heavier as Sarah sat next to the crate, watching Max and the other dog slowly circle each other. There was an odd familiarity between them, a bond that went beyond just two dogs meeting for the first time. It was clear that something bigger was at play here, something that neither she nor Max fully understood. Max approached the other dog cautiously, his tail tucked slightly, but his demeanor was calm, almost protective. The other dog, although weaker and frightened, seemed to relax under Max's presence. Sarah could see the subtle shift in the dog's body language, as if he knew that Max was no threat. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered to herself, but the answer didn't come immediately. She glanced back at Max, whose eyes were locked onto the other dog. It was almost like he was communicating silently with him, a language only they shared. The scene was eerily quiet, with only the soft breathing of the two dogs breaking the silence. As she continued to watch, a new thought struck her. This dog, this other German Shepherd, wasn't just a stray or a random animal left behind. He was a part of something, the same something that Max had been trained for. Max had been through this before. This dog had to be part of the same program, the same secret rescue unit Max had once belonged to. It wasn't just an accident that Max had found him here. He was leading her to this exact moment. Max suddenly turned toward Sarah, his expression intense. It was like he was asking her to do something, something only she could do. Without thinking, she reached for her phone, dialing the number for the shelter's director. It felt like the right thing to do. The phone rang a few times before the director's voice came through. "Sarah, is everything all right? Did you find Max's connection?" "I think I found it," she said, her voice shaky. "I found another dog. A German Shepherd. He's locked in a crate, and I think he was part of the same program Max was in. He looks like he's been abandoned, and I don't know what to do." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Where are you? We need to get him out of there. He's been left behind for far too long." "I'm at the warehouse on 5th Street. But there's something else," Sarah said, her mind racing. "Max, he led me here. He knew something was wrong. I think he was trying to find this dog." "Max has always been more than just a pet," the director replied, his voice filled with understanding. "He was trained for special rescue missions, just like the dog you found. I suspect that dog is part of a small group of survivors who were left behind when the program was shut down. They're highly trained, but they're also in danger. You need to be careful. There's more to this than you realize." Sarah looked down at the two dogs in front of her. Max was still calm, but there was a sadness in his eyes now, a recognition of something lost. The other dog, although weak, was responding to Max's presence, as if they shared a silent understanding of what had happened to them both. "We need to get him out of here," Sarah said firmly. "Max can help, right? We need to save him, and I'm not leaving until we do." "I'm sending someone over," the director said quickly. "But listen to me, Sarah. There's something you need to know. You may not be safe. The people who were behind the program, they might still be watching. If they find out what you've discovered, you could be in danger." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Danger? What are you talking about?" "The program was shut down for a reason," the director explained, his voice low. "But some of the people who were in charge didn't want it to end. There are others out there who were involved, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep the truth hidden." Max growled softly, as if sensing the same threat. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had never expected this. What had started as a mission to rescue one dog had turned into something much more complicated. It was clear now that Max had been leading her into a deeper mystery, one that threatened more than just their safety. She turned her attention back to Max and the other dog. Max was still watching over him, his body tense, as if alert to any danger that might be lurking. Sarah knew they didn't have much time. They had to get out of there before someone else found them. She turned to the other dog, her voice soft and reassuring. "We're going to get you out of here. Just hang in there." Max whined, nuzzling the other dog gently, as if confirming her words. It was like he understood that this was a rescue mission, that he wasn't just protecting Sarah anymore. He was protecting a fellow survivor. Together, they would save this dog, just like Max had saved so many others before. As Sarah reached into the crate to help the dog out, she suddenly heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching from outside. Her heart raced. The danger had already arrived. "Max, we have to move, now," Sarah said urgently. Max immediately sprang into action, standing between Sarah and the crate. His posture was protective, ready for whatever was coming. Sarah quickly pulled the other dog out of the crate, guiding him toward the exit. But just as she was about to leave, a shadow loomed in the doorway. Someone had found them. The air in the warehouse seemed to freeze as Sarah and Max stood frozen in place, the tension mounting with every passing second. Sarah's heart raced in her chest as the shadow in the doorway grew more defined. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a black jacket with the hood pulled low over his face. His footsteps echoed in the silence, deliberate and slow. Sarah's mind was scrambling, trying to think of what to do. She couldn't just stand there and wait for him to get closer. She needed to protect Max and the injured dog she had just rescued, but there was nowhere to hide in this vast, abandoned warehouse. Max, ever alert, stood in front of her, his body tense and ready to spring into action. His eyes were locked on the stranger, the low growl rumbling in his throat, a warning that this wasn't someone to be trusted. "Stay close to me, Max," Sarah whispered, barely able to hear her own voice over the pounding of her heart. The man took another step forward, and then stopped, his eyes flicking over Sarah and the two dogs. He seemed to be taking in the scene, assessing the situation, before a faint smile crossed his face. It wasn't comforting. In fact, it was the kind of smile that sent a shiver down her spine. "I should have known you'd be here, Sarah," the man said, his voice cold and calculating. "You're just like him, aren't you? Always in the way." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea who this man was, but she could feel the weight of his words. He knew her. He knew Maximum. And he seemed to know more than he should. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady, even though fear was bubbling up inside her. "Who are you?" The man's smile widened, but his eyes remained hard, like he was enjoying her confusion. "You really don't know, do you? Max and that dog," he nodded toward the dog Sarah had rescued. "They weren't just abandoned, you know. They were left behind. Forgotten. But I'm here to remind you of why they were left in the first place." Sarah felt a chill settle over her as the man stepped closer. She had no choice but to back up, keeping Max and the other dog between her and the stranger. She had no idea what he meant, but she could feel that danger was closing in fast. "Listen, I don't know who you are, but you need to leave. Right now," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice firm, but the man's presence was overwhelming. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was dealing with someone dangerous, someone who had power over everything she had just uncovered. The man chuckled softly, but there was nothing funny about it. "Oh, I'm afraid it's too late for that. You've already uncovered too much. The truth is, Sarah, you don't understand what you're dealing with. You never did." Max growled louder, his body tense, and Sarah could feel his energy shift. He was ready to fight. He had protected her before, and he would do it again. The man seemed to notice Max's growl, and his smile faltered for a brief moment. He straightened up, his eyes narrowing. "You're still the same, aren't you, Max?" he said, as if speaking to the dog like they had a shared history. "Always thinking you can change things. You don't know the full story, and neither does she." "What story?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising in frustration. "What are you talking about?" The man took another step closer, this time with a much colder expression. "The story of the project. The experiments. The ones like Max and the other dog. They weren't just rescue dogs. They were part of something bigger. Something much darker. And you," he pointed at her with a gloved hand, "you've just scratched the surface. But you can't stop it. You can't stop what's coming." A feeling of dread washed over Sarah as the man's words sank in. She had always known that there was something more to Max's past, but now it felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to be pulled into something far deeper than she had ever imagined. Max barked loudly, as if to warn the man to stay away, but the man didn't flinch. Instead, he just tilted his head slightly, as if he was sizing up Max's next move. He looked back at Sarah, his gaze cold. "You have no idea what's going on, do you?" he said, his voice almost pitying now. "You've been living in the dark, thinking you could just fix things. But it's already too late. There's no saving the dogs, no saving anyone from what's coming. You're in this now, whether you want to be or not. Sarah's thoughts were spinning, but her instincts kicked in. She couldn't let this man intimidate her. She couldn't let him scare her into giving up. I'm not afraid of you, she said, her voice filled with determination, though her heart was pounding hard in her chest. She wasn't going to let Max and the other dog go back into a life of fear and darkness. She wasn't going to let this man win. The man gave a low, dark chuckle. You should be. Just then, Max took a step forward, his body lowering into a protective stance. His eyes were locked onto the man, and there was a fire in his gaze, a fire that spoke of loyalty and strength. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt Sarah or the other dog. The man hesitated for just a moment, his eyes flicking between Sarah and Maximum. Then, with a sigh, he turned around slowly, his footsteps retreating toward the door. I'll be seeing you soon, he called over his shoulder before disappearing into the shadows of the warehouse. The room fell into a tense silence, and Sarah exhaled sharply, her heart still racing. She glanced at Max, who had already returned to his calm, protective stance. The other dog was still by her side, and Sarah could feel the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't over. Max had led her to this moment for a reason, and she couldn't back down now. There were more answers to find, more dangers to face, and no turning back. As Sarah stood there in the now quiet warehouse, she couldn't shake the chill that had settled over her. The man's words echoed in her mind, there's no saving anyone from what's coming. The weight of the threat was real, and Sarah couldn't ignore the dark shadow that seemed to be looming over them. But she couldn't just let it go. She couldn't leave without understanding more about what was really going on. Max's presence beside her was grounding. The other dog, still weak but showing signs of improvement, seemed to sense that the danger wasn't completely gone. He pressed closer to Sarah, as if seeking comfort, and Max nuzzled him gently, calming the nervous animal. Despite the fear creeping into her mind, Sarah could feel the quiet strength of the two dogs. They had been through things she couldn't even begin to comprehend, but they had survived, and they were here now, with her. She wasn't going to let them down. Come on, Max, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. We need to figure this out. We can't just leave him here. Max looked up at her, and for a brief moment, she could swear there was understanding in his eyes, like he was silently agreeing with her. The other dog, his fur matted with dirt and blood, looked up at her too, his gaze trusting and thankful. They were all in this together now. Sarah turned and slowly made her way to the exit, Max leading the way, ever watchful. The silence of the warehouse felt heavy as they stepped out into the fading daylight. The streets outside were eerily quiet, the city around them unaware of the danger they had narrowly escaped. But Sarah knew this wasn't over. The man's words had been a warning. The darkness that loomed over Max, the other dog, and even herself, wasn't something that would just go away. It was a reminder that there was a much bigger story here, one that went deeper than any of them had expected. As they walked toward her car, Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She quickly pulled it out, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the number. It was the director from the shelter. Sarah? His voice came through, urgent. You've got to get out of there? The people behind this, they know you're involved now. They're coming for you. What do you mean? Sarah's voice shook. I thought I was just helping. I was just trying to save these dogs. The director's tone became even more serious. It's bigger than that, Sarah. They're watching you, they're watching Maximum. They're not going to stop until they have what they want. You need to leave the city. You need to disappear for a while. Sarah glanced over at Max, who was sniffing the air, alert as always. The other dog was still by her side, but he seemed more exhausted now, his limp more pronounced. She felt a surge of protectiveness rise in her chest. There was no way she could leave them behind. I can't just run away, Sarah said firmly, the decision clear in her mind. I won't. Max. He led me to that warehouse for a reason. He's not going to stop until we figure this out. Sarah, listen to me, the director's voice broke through her resolve. I know you want to help. But you have no idea what you're up against. They have resources, they have power. And they'll use it against you. A sharp pain shot through her chest. She had never been one to back down from a challenge, but the gravity of the situation was starting to sink in. The man she had encountered at the warehouse, the one who seemed to know so much, had made it clear that this wasn't just about saving animals. This was about something darker, something far more dangerous. And it seemed like the longer she stayed in the dark, the more she was putting herself and Max, and now the other dog, at risk. Max suddenly stopped, turning his head towards Sarah with a questioning look. He could sense her hesitation, but he didn't push. He simply waited, watching her closely, like he knew she had to make the choice herself. I won't run, she said quietly, more to herself than to the director. I won't leave them. The director sighed, his voice softer now, but filled with a trace of regret. "I can't stop you, Sarah. Just be careful. And if anything happens, don't hesitate to call for help. You're not alone in this." The line went silent as Sarah ended the call. She didn't know what was coming next, but she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't back down now. The dogs, Max in particular, had already shown her that they were more than just animals. They were survivors, and they had been through things that could break anyone else. They had earned her loyalty, and she owed them the same in return. She looked at the two German shepherds beside her, Max, her fierce protector, and the injured dog, who seemed to be growing stronger with each passing minute. They were in this together now, and they were going to face whatever was coming as a team. She couldn't let fear stop her. "We'll figure this out," she whispered, her voice steady. Max wagged his tail slightly, the only sign of approval he gave, before turning his head toward the darkening streets ahead. Whatever was coming, they were ready to face it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city streets, Sarah's mind raced with thoughts of what the director had said. She could feel the weight of the danger growing heavier with every step she took. She had been warned, but she still didn't know who was behind all of this or what they really wanted. All she knew was that there were powerful forces at play, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. Max trotted beside her, alert and scanning the surroundings, his ears twitching at every sound. He was always so in tune with everything around him. The other dog, still weak but recovering, stayed close to Sarah, occasionally leaning into her for support as if he could sense the rising tension. She reached her car and paused, glancing over at the dogs. Max gave her a look, as if urging her to make a decision. Sarah didn't hesitate. She wasn't about to drive home and pretend like everything was normal. There was no safety in running away anymore. The danger had followed them to this point, and it would only get worse if she didn't keep moving forward. Max's eyes locked onto her, as if understanding her thoughts, and he gave a soft bark. It was a reminder, a quiet push for her to keep going. She couldn't stop now. She got in the car, starting the engine, the sound of the engine humming a brief comfort in the otherwise quiet night. The dog settled in the backseat. Max remained alert, as if he were watching for any signs of trouble, while the other dog lay down, exhausted but seemingly at peace for the moment. Sarah drove through the city, her mind a whirl of thoughts. She needed to find answers. She needed to find out what was happening, and who was behind all of it. But more than that, she needed to protect the dogs. They had been through too much, and they weren't just animals to her, they were family. She wouldn't let anything happen to them. As she turned a corner, the faint glow of the streetlights reflected off the rearview mirror, casting an eerie light on the road ahead. The night seemed darker now, the city quieter than usual. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel. It was too quiet, too still. It felt like they were being watched. Max let out a low growl from the backseat, his body stiffening. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she quickly glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just empty streets behind her. But she knew better than to ignore Max's instincts. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't the director, it was an unknown number. Sarah's stomach twisted. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" Her voice was steady, but her heart was pounding in her chest. "Sarah," a familiar voice came through the line. It was the man from the warehouse, the one who had confronted her earlier. "You're still out there? You really think you can run from this?" Her blood ran cold at the sound of his voice. "What do you want from me?" she asked, trying to keep her tone as calm as possible, though inside, her mind was racing. He laughed darkly, and the sound sent chills down her spine. "You think this is just about you? This is bigger than you, Sarah. You don't understand what you're involved in. But soon, you will. You'll see the truth soon enough. But for now, you're playing a dangerous game. And you won't win." Before Sarah could respond, the line went dead. She stared at the phone in disbelief, her pulse racing. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. This wasn't just a warning anymore. They were after her. After Maximum. After the other dog. She wasn't sure what the truth was, but she knew it had something to do with Maximum. He had been a part of something much bigger than anyone had ever realized. And now she was involved too, whether she liked it or not. Max barked again from the backseat, more urgently this time, his body tensing. Sarah glanced at the rearview mirror once more. Still nothing. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on them. Something dark. Something dangerous. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She wasn't going to let fear control her. Max had always been there for her, and now it was her turn to protect him. As she turned another corner, a figure suddenly appeared in the headlights ahead, standing in the middle of the road. Sarah slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the pavement. Her heart leapt into her throat as the figure stepped closer to the car, and she quickly reached for the door handle, ready to make a run for it. But before she could react, the figure stepped aside, revealing something in the shadows behind them. Sarah's eyes widened as she saw it. A van, parked just a few feet away, its engine running. The doors of the van were slightly open, and she could hear muffled voices from inside. Max let out a loud bark from the backseat, his growl deep and menacing, as if he recognized the situation for what it was, a trap. "Get out of the car, Sarah," the man's voice came through the phone again, distorted but clear enough to make her blood run cold. "You've come too far. You can't hide anymore." She froze, not knowing what to do. Her pulse raced. The van's doors were still open, and she knew there was no turning back now. Whatever was going to happen, it was happening tonight. Max's body was tense, and he let out another sharp bark, his fur bristling with anger. The other dog growled softly from the back, sensing the danger. Sarah could feel the heat rising in her chest, the fear giving way to a burning resolve. She couldn't let them win. Not like this. With one last glance at the van, Sarah made a split-second decision. She threw the car into reverse, the tires screeching as she sped backward down the street. She wasn't going to make it easy for them. But as she slammed the car into drive again, her phone buzzed once more. This time, she didn't answer. The time for talking was over. The time to fight had come. The tires screeched as Sarah sped down the street, her heart pounding in her chest. Max was still growling from the backseat, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, the tension in the car palpable. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles ached. She had no idea who was in the van or what they wanted, but she knew one thing for certain: they weren't going to stop until they had her. She had to think fast. She couldn't outrun them forever. The streets were becoming more familiar, but the sound of the van's engine behind her, growing closer with every second, made it clear they were closing in. Max's growls grew louder, almost as if he could sense what was coming. Sarah shot a glance at him in the rearview mirror. His fur was standing on end, his body tense and alert. The other dog, who had been lying low until now, was sitting up, eyes wide with unease. He sensed it too. The danger. The night had taken an unexpected turn, and there was no turning back. Up ahead, Sarah saw an alley to the right, and without a second thought, she turned the wheel sharply. The car skidded slightly, tires screeching against the asphalt as she darted into the narrow alley. She glanced over her shoulder, just in time to see the van follow her turn, its headlights piercing the darkness. She could feel the panic rising in her chest, but she pushed it back. "Think, Sarah. Think. What's the next move?" The alley was dark, cluttered with trash bins and abandoned boxes, the perfect place to lose them if she could make it to the end. She stepped on the gas, weaving between obstacles, her mind racing. The van was still behind them, but the alley was too tight for it to follow as easily. She had a chance. She took another sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a stack of crates. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the end of the alley, an open street. She wasn't sure what she would find there, but it had to be better than the tight confines of the alley with the van right on her tail. "Hold on, Max," she muttered, her voice shaking as she pushed the car faster. Max barked loudly from the backseat, urging her on, and Sarah could feel the energy between them, that silent bond that had been growing stronger since they first met. He was counting on her. The dogs were counting on her. As she neared the alley's exit, her phone buzzed again. She ignored it this time, her focus solely on getting out of the alley and onto the open street. She could hear the van's engine revving, the pursuit relentless. Then, just as Sarah was about to reach the street, a loud thud shook the car. Something hit the back of her vehicle hard, sending the car lurching forward. She slammed on the brakes, her heart leaping into her throat as she tried to regain control of the wheel. The van had caught up. The loud engine of the van roared just behind her, but Sarah didn't give in. She slammed the car into reverse, the tires screeching against the pavement. She couldn't let them catch her, not now. The alley was a dead end now. There was no way to escape unless she made the decision to turn around and face whatever was coming. Max's barking intensified, almost as if he could feel the impending danger, and Sarah's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Suddenly, the van's headlights flashed brightly, blinding her for a moment. The van's front bumper hit her car again, pushing it back toward the wall of the alley. Panic surged in her chest as she realized just how close the van was to trapping her. She had to act. Sarah took a deep breath and made a split-second decision. She threw the car into drive again and pushed the gas pedal to the floor. The car lurched forward, slamming against the van with a force she hadn't expected. The collision was hard, but it was enough to give her the space she needed. Max barked loudly again, urging her on as she pushed the car harder, racing out of the alley and onto the street. The van wasn't far behind, but Sarah knew they were gaining ground. The headlights from the van reflected off her rearview mirror, flashing in her eyes. She had only seconds to think. Without warning, she swerved to the right, aiming for a narrow side street that led into an industrial part of town. The van tried to follow but was unable to maneuver in the tight space. Sarah's heart raced as she sped through the deserted streets, the buildings on either side casting long shadows in the dim light. Max was still alert, his head turning back and forth between Sarah and the road. The other dog remained silent, but Sarah could sense the fear in him, too. He knew the danger wasn't over. They were being hunted, and the night felt darker than ever before. As Sarah took another sharp turn, the headlights from the van finally disappeared from view. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For now, they had escaped. But she knew it wasn't over. Not yet. She pulled over to the side of the road, her body shaking from the adrenaline, and took a moment to steady herself. Max was still by her side, ever faithful, ever alert. The other dog was now lying quietly in the backseat, exhausted from the night's events. "Are you okay, Max?" Sarah asked softly, her voice trembling. Max's ears perked up, and he gave a low bark as if to say he was fine. The response made her feel slightly better, but the danger was far from over. As Sarah sat there in the quiet, the sound of her own breathing the only thing filling the car, she felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine. This was just the beginning. Whatever had drawn them into this dark world wasn't over. And as she looked out at the empty street, she realized one thing: they weren't safe yet. Max seemed to sense it too. He lifted his head, looking out the window as if he could see something in the distance, something Sarah couldn't see. She glanced at the road ahead and tightened her grip on the steering wheel once more. They weren't alone in this anymore. The shadows were closing in, and she could feel them watching. And somewhere, out there in the darkness, she knew the truth was waiting for them to uncover. The silence in the car was suffocating, broken only by the soft panting of Max and the other dog. Sarah's mind was still racing, trying to process everything that had happened, trying to make sense of the dangers that had come at them from every direction. She glanced at Max, who was looking out the window with his usual keen focus, his body tense as if he knew the night was far from over. "Max, what is it?" she whispered, her voice strained. But Max only turned to her for a brief second, his eyes full of understanding, before returning his attention to the road ahead. It was as though he was waiting for something, sensing that the calm they were feeling now wouldn't last long. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The van was gone, at least for the moment, but she knew better than to think she was safe. She couldn't afford to stay on this street for long. They had to keep moving, to stay one step ahead of whatever was after them. But she didn't know where to go. She didn't have a plan. All she had was Max and the other dog, both of whom had been through hell already. As she started the car and began driving again, she tried to shake off the feeling that they were being watched. The streets were eerily empty, the city now a maze of silent buildings and dark alleyways. She kept her eyes glued to the rearview mirror, expecting the van to appear at any moment, but the road behind her remained empty. Suddenly, she heard the familiar sound of her phone buzzing again. She hesitated, torn between ignoring it and answering. Her last conversation with the man from the warehouse still echoed in her mind. She didn't trust anyone anymore, but at the same time, she knew she couldn't afford to ignore any information that might give her a clue about what was really going on. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone and glanced at the screen. The caller ID was blocked. Of course. She took another deep breath before answering, her voice steady despite the unease crawling up her spine. "Hello?" The line crackled, then the voice came through, low and threatening. "You're still alive, Sarah. Surprised? You should be. You've made it this far, but you're running out of time." Her blood ran cold. The voice was the same man who had warned her earlier. He sounded almost amused, as if he enjoyed playing this twisted game. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, trying to sound confident, even though she could feel the fear rising within her. "You're already involved," he said, his tone full of dark amusement. "You can't back out now. You think you've escaped, but you're just walking into a bigger trap. And you'll soon find out what happens when you start digging too deep." Sarah's grip tightened on the steering wheel. She could feel Max's eyes on her, sensing her distress, and the other dog was now sitting up, his ears perked, aware that something was off. She couldn't let this man control her. She couldn't let him have that power. "I'll find out who's behind this," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "And I won't stop until I know the truth." The man on the other end of the line chuckled darkly. "The truth?" he echoed. "You're already deeper than you realize. But go ahead, keep playing your game. You won't like the end." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Sarah let the phone fall into her lap, her pulse racing. What had he meant? What was going to happen when she uncovered the truth? Her mind spun in circles as she tried to piece together the puzzle. She had been a part of something bigger than she could have imagined, and she still didn't understand how deep the conspiracy went. Max let out a soft whine from the backseat, his eyes locked on her with an expression that seemed to say, "We have to keep moving, Sarah." She nodded, as if to reassure him that she knew. But deep down, she felt the weight of the situation pressing on her chest. They couldn't run forever. Eventually, they would have to face whatever was out there, whatever danger was hunting them. She took another deep breath and steered the car onto a side street, her headlights cutting through the darkness. The city felt more like a labyrinth now, the streets winding and unfamiliar. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stay in one place for long. The road ahead seemed endless, but she kept driving, hoping that somehow, the answers would come to her. The dogs were still quiet, but Sarah could feel their presence, their loyalty, their connection to her growing stronger with every mile. She wasn't alone, even though the world outside seemed to be closing in around her. Max shifted in the backseat, his ears twitching as though he'd heard something she hadn't. She glanced in the rearview mirror, but saw nothing. Just shadows. Just empty streets. But she didn't feel alone. It was as if someone, or something, was watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. Sarah drove on, the tension in the air thickening with every passing second. She didn't know where this road would take her, but she knew one thing: the closer she got to the truth, the closer she came to the danger that awaited them all. As they drove deeper into the night, Sarah's mind went back to the dogs. She thought about how they had come into her life, how Max had always been there for her. She realized then that it wasn't just about finding the truth, it was about protecting the ones she loved. Max and the other dog had risked their lives for her. She couldn't let that be in vain. She had to finish what they had started. And whatever was coming next, she was ready to face it. Sarah kept driving, her grip on the wheel tightening with every mile. She knew that something big was coming, but she didn't know what. The tension in the car was thick, almost suffocating. Max's ears were perked up, his body rigid as if he could sense the storm that was closing in on them. The other dog, too, was alert, his eyes scanning the darkened streets, as though he was trying to piece together the same puzzle Sarah was struggling to solve. The city was quiet now, the usual hum of traffic and people now replaced with an eerie stillness. It was like they were the only ones left in the world. Sarah felt like they were being drawn into something much bigger than her, than Max, than anything they could have imagined. She wasn't just running anymore. She was hunting down the truth. She glanced at the rearview mirror once more. For a moment, it seemed like the road behind her was empty, the streets abandoned. But then her eyes caught something, a faint shadow, moving just out of reach. It wasn't a person. It was too fast, too smooth, to be human. It had to be someone following them. Watching them. A sudden jolt of fear hit her chest. Was it the same van from before? Or something else? Whatever it was coming closer. She could feel it in her bones. Sarah's heart started racing as she made another sharp turn, hoping to lose whatever was behind them. But just as she did, a figure stepped out of the darkness, almost as if they had been waiting for her to make that very move. The headlights illuminated the figure, a tall man, his face hidden by the shadows, standing right in the middle of the street. Sarah slammed on the brakes, nearly skidding into him. Max growled low in the backseat, the tension in the car reaching its peak. The man didn't move. He just stood there, his posture almost casual, as if he knew she wouldn't stop. But Sarah wasn't about to let this stranger stand in her way. Her fingers tightened on the wheel, and her eyes narrowed. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was done running. With a deep breath, Sarah slammed the car into reverse, narrowly missing the man as she backed up. Her heart raced, but she didn't stop. She had come too far. There was no turning back now. The man didn't chase after her. Instead, he just stood there, watching, as though he knew exactly what would happen next. The car screeched as Sarah sped away, her mind still reeling from the close encounter. She had no idea who that man was, but she knew one thing: he wasn't the last person she would encounter on this dangerous road. Max barked loudly from the backseat, as though to remind her they weren't alone in this fight. The other dog sat up, eyes sharp, his body tense. They could feel it too. The danger was closing in. But there was one thing Sarah knew for sure: she wasn't going to let this man, or anyone else, stand in her way. The road ahead seemed endless, but Sarah wasn't afraid anymore. She had Max by her side, and together, they would find the answers they were searching for. She wouldn't stop. Not now. The night stretched on as Sarah drove through the silent streets, her thoughts racing with the uncertainty of what was to come. She could still feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like the calm before the storm. But now, she wasn't scared. Not anymore. The mystery that had been unfolding in front of her for days was no longer something she could run from. She had to face it head on. Max's steady breathing in the backseat was a constant comfort. The other dog, too, was calm now, though still watchful, his eyes scanning every corner of the street. Sarah knew they had her back, and that gave her strength. She wasn't alone in this. Not anymore. The road seemed to go on forever, until, without warning, the car came to a stop. A large, looming figure appeared ahead, blocking the street entirely. This time, Sarah didn't hesitate. She slowed down and stopped just a few feet from the figure. She could barely make out its features in the dim light, but there was something familiar about it. And then, in the silence of the moment, the figure stepped forward into the headlights. Sarah's heart skipped a beat when she saw who it was. It was the man, the one from the warehouse. The one who had been behind everything. "I knew you'd come," he said softly, his voice almost gentle but laced with something darker. He looked tired, like he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "I wasn't sure you'd survive this long. But you did." Sarah's blood ran cold as she stared at him. This was the man who had been pulling the strings from the shadows, the one who had tried to bury the truth. But now, here he was, standing right in front of her. "I won't stop," Sarah said, her voice shaking with determination. "I'll find out everything. I'll expose everything you've done." The man chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "You're already too late. Everything is already in motion. It's been set in place for far longer than you realize." Max barked from the backseat, as if urging Sarah to take action. She didn't need another sign. She knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to let this man get away with it. Not this time. Before she could make her move, the man stepped back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. The road ahead was now clear, but the sense of dread lingered. Sarah knew that this was far from over. But this time, she was ready. She had Max and the other dog. And together, they would face whatever came next. As she drove off, she could feel the weight of the night lifting. There was no more fear in her heart, only determination. She had uncovered enough to know that the truth was out there. And no one, not even this mysterious figure, could stop her from finding it. She didn't know what the future held, or how far the conspiracy reached. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going to let anyone control her anymore. She wasn't going to stop until the truth was exposed. No matter the cost. Max, sensing her resolve, let out a soft whine from the backseat. Sarah smiled, a quiet, determined smile. "We'll finish this, Maximum. We're just getting started." And as the car drove into the night, the future remained uncertain, but Sarah knew one thing, she wasn't alone anymore. And together with her loyal companions, they would uncover the truth, no matter what it took. As the car drove deeper into the night, Sarah's heart was filled with a new sense of determination. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew she was ready to face whatever came next. With Max and the other dog by her side, she was no longer afraid. Together, they would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Sarah's gaze shifted to the horizon, the promise of answers waiting just beyond. She wasn't alone anymore, and that gave her the strength to keep going, to keep fighting for what was right. And as they drove toward the unknown, she knew this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything. Max let out a soft bark, as if to say, "We've got this." Sarah smiled, feeling a deep bond between them, a bond forged through every challenge and every moment of uncertainty. And with that, the car disappeared into the distance, leaving behind only the quiet echo of the road, the mystery still unfolding. If you enjoyed this thrilling story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more emotional and gripping animal adventures that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let us know in the comments what you think, and make sure you never miss out on the next chapter of this unforgettable journey. Together, we'll uncover the truth, one story at a time.